I really want to thank FAO and Dr. Kundavi, who is my direct counterpart in Bangkok, for the invitation, and of course, the hosting by the Fijian government is greatly appreciated. As I look around the room and I see some familiar faces, and of course the Rome-based agencies we're working closely with, I feel very much at home here, and very much, which is also reassuring because of the deep partnership we have with the member states of the region. WFP has been working here also in over 40 years. We've been applying our dual mandate of development and emergency. We work in both areas, and we've been evolving and consciously evolving in the region as the region has evolved in all those 40-some-odd years. The latest issue on the evolving nature of our work here is certainly informed by the SDGs, specifically SDG 2, Ending Hunger, as part of the Zero Hunger campaign. We are in the midst now of doing a shift of our project portfolio to align fully with SDG 2 primarily. And as we do that, conscious that this is the most disaster-prone region in the world, we're also helping governments and partners manage risks as part of our emergency mandate. And this is framed as much as possible by Sendai, COP, and also the humanitarian instruments, including the World Humanitarian Summit and so forth. We primarily we help on the availability pillar of food security, but we also, of course, work quite a bit in the access and utilization side of it. We have, of course, heard that nutrition is central to the issues of Asia, facing Asia. We've also heard this morning that the incidence and prevalence of food security and nutrition issues in Asia mean that the world will not achieve SDG 2, will not shift the dial on SDG 2 unless this region does. So we're conscious of the great challenges in the region. At the same time, as we evolve, we want to be appropriate and relevant. Some of the techniques in the past that you associate with WFP with in terms of implementing food assistance or food aid certainly don't apply in this dynamically growing region. However, as we work with you in particular, we are discovering that we can still add value. Oftentimes it's more in an enabling way, technical assistance, advocacy, capacity strengthening, as opposed to direct implementation. So that is also part of our shift to remain as relevant as possible. And in this regard, we're making sure that we align fully with national development planning, and we know this is a frustration with so many governments, we are conscious that we need to work in as much coherence as possible with the UN family, particularly the Rome-based agencies, but also the UN recognized leads for nutrition, which is FAO, WFP, UNICEF, WHO. Not necessarily in that order, but the four of us are working closely together on nutrition-specific issues, and again, trying to make sure that our country strategic plans are all properly aligned so that you enjoy the coherence of our support and our augmentation for your efforts in achieving SDG 2 and managing the risks to implementing that development agenda. Maybe to highlight a few issues, in fact, some of our interventions that might be of interest to you, with some of them fresh in my mind as I've traveled directly from Afghanistan, Pakistan to arrive here. In the case, in terms of nutrition interventions, where we're quite active, as we said before, as has been said before, particularly by the President of, His Honorable President of Fiji, the nutrition, to achieve success in the nutrition area, it's a combination of both the right food, but also the right behavior, the right feeding practices. In terms of the right food, certainly solutions that are indigenous and involve diversification of agriculture and availability in the market are important. We also try to contribute, in some cases, enhancing food through fortification. Many of you are working with us on rice fortification approaches, for example. There's also the possibility of new products. And that brings me to Pakistan, where we were recently visiting Sindh province, which has some of the worst undernutrition indicators in the world, and certainly in the region, where there's a success brewing with a new nutrition product that was developed with the private sector and the government of Pakistan. It is being applied because it's an intense intervention with children under 2 and under 5, which is the key period for intervening for the stunting issue. And it's combined with a campaign with Ministry of Health at the community level, at the household level, in terms of better behavioral practices. The combination of the two, and there's plenty of evidence now that this is required, is seemingly having an effect. And so the challenge is actually scaling up that particular intervention in Sindh and replicating it elsewhere in the region and of course beyond. Another area is, and this speaks to the remarks of the Honorable Minister from Laos just now, is while certainly work at the central level with governments is very, very important, there's also should be complemented with work at the community level. And this brings me to Afghanistan, where we have some very interesting work that is, it's looking at the issue from a food systems point of view. So as we are certainly intervening in Afghanistan with some humanitarian interventions and other food for work or cash for work type of interventions, what we're doing is trying to source locally with smallholder farmers as to create demand and source consciously, and it's our largest program in that regard worldwide, as WFP does this type of approach generally. But what's interesting is as we source grain, for example, locally, we then work with the private milling sector to fortify that grain, and then the final product, which is fortified, is then used on programs that we're implementing, whether it's dealing with an emergency response or food for asset type of projects. And those projects are designed from the point of view of disaster risk reduction and increasing production at the local community level, done in partnership with FAO and the Ministry of Agriculture in Afghanistan. And we saw one very interesting example where a community was supported in this effort in managing its water resources from a disaster risk reduction point of view so that food relief wasn't needed every year for flash floods. As this water was managed through drip irrigation, an orchard was created, and the community is also benefiting from small-scale irrigation for general agriculture. This is and then, of course, we can bring in the demand in terms of local sourcing and the milling and so on. So the whole thing is a virtuous, sustainable cycle. And it's this type of programming, which is quite oriented at the community level. It involves managing risks, as well as, of course, contributing to the development at the community level. One last example, and it's been touched on by the DG of FAO, for example, is that increasingly we're discovering that we can link social safety nets. School feeding and school meals was what was cited. And indeed, in this region, this is a growing intervention that is allowing us to take a program that we're involved in, WFP in terms of technical assistance and implementation, link it with local production, community production, and instill more community ownership for the whole school meals feeding operation. And of course, stimulating local production, diet diversity, and coupling that with partners like UNICEF, inserting into the curriculum nutrition type of education to work on the behavioral change with the future's mothers and fathers in those nations. And we are, in those communities. We are having a lot of progress on this in Laos, which was certainly cited, and other countries of Southeast Asia, and it's starting to create interest now, we've noticed, in South Asia, and we'll be ready to move this along. This is termed, a simple term, homegrown school feeding. So it's another community-based intervention that is improving food security from all different perspectives, smallholder farmer, and of course the students and communities themselves. Just a couple more points. One is that, as I mentioned earlier, this region has also the largest, aside from the largest concentration of the food insecure and undernourished, we also have the concentration of the most vulnerable populations to disasters. So managing risks so that they don't get out of hand and undermine the progress on the development agenda, including SDG 2, is another major feature in virtually every program intervention that we're currently working on. We have, again, some proven techniques that are developing quickly in the region itself. With FAO and ourselves, we have put in place a food security monitoring and early warning system in the government of Indonesia that has been successful there in dealing with El Nino, La Nina, and other challenges to food security at the subnational and national level. That has also been replicated in Cambodia and Sri Lanka, and we're looking at ways to bring this to other SAARC, ASEAN, and Pacific countries, and it's something that I'm happy to talk about bilaterally over the next day or two. We're also involved in looking at how food reserves, which is a feature particularly in South Asia, can be further enhanced in terms of supply chain optimization and management, and the linkages to social protection schemes, and those and promoting the use of and development of shock responsive social protection. Fiji is one of the leading lights in this regard, and in fact, a few weeks ago, down the way at the Hilton was a regional conference with the World Bank and the Australian government. WFP was part of it, looking at shock responsive social protection and its feasibility in this region, given some of the recent successes in Fiji, but also Tonga, in responding to emergencies, leveraging a very agile social protection scheme. So this is another linkage, again, to managing risks and, of course, the response to shocks, so that it doesn't, these shocks and risks don't get out of hand and undermine the overall effort at achieving food security and ending hunger. Now, last point I would just say is, as we here in our headquarters, at our executive level, we're very conscious that globally, from a global perspective, we have the solutions to ending hunger. We have techniques, we have technology, we have available wealth in the world, and collectively, if you think of a whole of society approach, we have the capacities and the capabilities to end hunger. The issues are, of course, applying the requisite amount of resources, getting good design, smart design in terms of interventions, working properly and in a coordinated fashion with governments, member states, and to work on this campaign. And so it's a coordination issue. And as we've heard before, ultimately this is going to be achieved through stronger and deeper partnership. Partnerships are key. They are certainly the partnerships that we're forging in this room and out of this conference, but they go beyond. We have to think, indeed, as the, again, Honorable Minister from Laos mentioned, a whole of government approach, as well as I've alluded to, a whole of society approach, which maximizes the use of the domestic private sector, the domestic civil society, and involves the communities and affected populations themselves. So with that, knowing that we're having a bit of time constraints, I will end there and say thank you very much